Welcome to the Deep Dive Spirituality Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Brian Russell, and today it's my privilege to welcome back to the show my good friend, Dr. Joel Pérez. Joel is a coach for businesses and organizations. He's an expert on cultural humility and helping leaders to grow in their capacity to build bridges and to build truly inclusive organizations. We're going to also talk today about how some of these principles can be applied to leadership and culture within our local communities of faith. You're going to find Joel to be a source of real wisdom. All of the information that we talk about will be shared down in the show notes. If you would use the Amazon links that are found in the show notes to make whatever purchases that you typically make, that would be a way that you can help out the show. Also, I would be grateful if you would subscribe, like, and share this episode with others. Let's jump into my conversation with Dr. Joel Pérez. Hey, Joel, great to speak with you again. Thanks for being my guest.
It's great to be here, Brian. Thank you for having me on the show, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, and congratulations. I know you've recently published your very first book, and we'll have a link in the show notes, Dear White Leader, How to Achieve Organizational Excellence. Before we kind of jump in and talk a little bit about that, talk about what it was like to have your first book come out just at a personal level.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. It was a great experience. I learned a lot about myself in writing because I poured a lot of myself in the book. Which, if I know you've read it, but if your listeners end up picking it up, they will also realize that a lot of the book is about me and my journey towards developing this posture of cultural humility. But I learned a lot, sometimes more than I ever thought I was going to know, particularly around publishing.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was, I mean, I could do a whole podcast interview just on the publishing side of things. But it was really helpful for me, one, to refine myself and who I am as a leader, as a consultant, as an executive coach. And also, like, I wanted it to have an impact on my readers, to help them know what cultural humility is and how to develop the posture so they can become exceptional leaders. And so now, when I talk about the book, I reference this idea of exceptional leadership versus effective leadership. But no, it was definitely a very good process. I think it honed my message and who I am and what I do and the type of support that I can provide. And it was challenging because I had to create space to do it. I mean, you've written a few different books, so you know the amount of time that goes into writing something, particularly something that you feel so passionate about. And for me, it was a story in my own journey, but then also as I started working with some of my coaching clients as they were trying to get better at leading diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work, but didn't know where to start or were feeling stuck. And in our coaching, I started realizing there's a message here that I think would be helpful for others to know and for me to share about. And so that really was the inspiration for writing the book, in addition to really helping people engage in learning how to build inclusive organizations with a deep sense of belonging and the psychological safety that a lot of leaders and organizational leaders want to create in their organizations, and particularly for your audience, for pastors who are looking to do that in their churches or in the nonprofits they run, is, I think, could be really helpful for them. So.
Yeah, and talk about how your faith has informed your work, because obviously, even since your book came out, I've had a whole switch in administration and
Mhm.
around the whole DEI conversation, which can be a kind of a shibboleth, actually. I think it's actually fair to say that that could signal something in either political direction. But you're a believer, you're Christian, you grew up in evangelical church.
Mhm.
Talk about how your faith actually informs the work that you do, which is about helping people to helping people to feel that they belong in organizations, and helping leaders. You use the title "Dear White Leader" to be able to create spaces that allow
Mhm.
folks to thrive and flourish.
Yeah. So I would say my faith informed me quite a bit in the sense of wanting to helping leaders create spaces where people can come together and seek to understand each other instead of seeking to convince each other. And what I share in the book, and then when I do these workshops on cultural humility, or when I speak, I say really upfront that I'm not asking you to change your values or beliefs. I'm asking you to learn and be willing to engage in a conversation where you're going to walk away with a better understanding of that other person, and developing a deep curiosity to do that. And so, even in my own life, growing up Pentecostal, evangelical, when I was a student at Biola, I did a lot of that work. I didn't have the language of cultural humility or even bridge building at that point, but it was clear as my peers have talked to me about how they experienced me at Biola, is that I was really good about bringing people together, even those that really vehemently disagreed with each other, because we were all believers and we had a deep love for Christ, and that we needed to be able to have conversations. And I think we, unfortunately, in this current state we find ourselves in, we don't we don't put Christ at the center. We put politics at the center, and really decide whether you want, if you want to use left or right language, whether you're far to the left or far to the right. People are not willing to come together and have meaningful dialogue because they automatically make assumptions about the other person because of their political affiliation, or they know their political affiliation. So people might say about me, well, they read the book and, well, Joel's definitely on the really progressive side, but you don't know me, right? And so you don't know that I have 4 kids. I've been married over 28 years. Yes, I identify as Mexican American, but I'm also a believer. Faith is very important to me. You're making some assumptions based on what you see or hear without really getting to know me. And that's the danger we find ourselves in, is that we're not able to engage in conversation, even with those we disagree with. And that's become problematic. And I think the church used to be a place where people could come together from all walks of life, right? And we've gotten to the point now where, because we're, so 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 we're
Siloed,
so
right?
upset.
Siloed. Yeah.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
so obsessed with finding the right believer to come to our church if they think this way. Well, then you crowd out people who think differently. And so, where churches used to be, people could come from all walks of life, all political affiliations, and you may not agree with people politically, or even that, I'm a Dodger fan and you're a San Francisco fan, and that's problematic for some people. I mean, that there's a rivalry there. But we were able to come together and have conversation and break bread together, and we've lost that ability because we have put each other into boxes, and that's unfortunate. And so, what I tell people is, people are like, what do we do to counteract that? I go, one, join some clubs where politics is not part of the conversation. It could be pickleball, it could be tennis, could be a hiking group, a walking group, a running group. We're just having conversation about one thing you have in common, away from that other stuff that can become divisive. And then when things start, like, you have a curiosity about, well, I really want to know why you believe what you believe, then you're grounded in a friendship that you like. Well, I really like Brian, and I trust him, and he's a good person. We may have a conversation, and we may not come to an agreement on something, but I still like him, and he's still a person that I trust and I value, and I see the dignity in Brian. And unfortunately, we're not doing that anymore. And so that's the problem we find ourselves in today. But faith is really much, going back to your question. Faith has really informed that. And so I was having lunch with a nonprofit leader who's also a believer. And he wanted to know about cultural humility. And so I talked to him, he's like, oh, so you want people to be like Jesus? And I said, well, that's an oversimplification, but yes, I mean, I want people to learn how to engage in conversation with curiosity, valuing the dignity in the other person, and coming to not trying to convince them that they're wrong, but coming to some kind of having a conversation that's going to help me be better, more thoughtful, and have a better understanding, even though ultimately we may choose to disagree, but you're still my friend.
Good. Yeah, and you know, you kind of a little bit done a little backdoor definition of cultural humility for us. And by the way, if you're enjoying this conversation, I've had Joel on previously, so I'll put links to some of our previous conversations on here as well. You know, I shared this when I had the privilege of being one of your advanced readers and stuff. And you know, to me, when I read your book, I just think, yeah, you know, is it oversimplification to say this is being like Jesus? Well, of course, but it's that, but at some level, what I actually thought is like to me, culture humility comes really close to being like a virtue, essentially,
Mhm.
that could easily be connected with the classic Christian virtues. So connect that with organizational excellence, and why is it
Yeah.
important to have that cultural humility piece if we want to have excellent organizations, which can be churches or if it's a small business owner or whatever we're talking about.
Yeah, so I was just with a Rotarian group last week, and very similarly, that question came up in the sense of why do I care? Why should I care about this as a business owner, right? Or certainly a small business owner. Well, one is if you genuinely care about having developing this posture of cultural humility is going to help you engage your employees, your clients, your customers in a way where you value them as people because you're able to one. So one of the core components of cultural humility, which is also true of leadership, is self-awareness and self-critique. So understanding those things with understanding your biases, right? And we could talk more about that if you want, but understanding your biases, but also getting to know the people around you so that one, you understand their story, their narrative, so you can deeply get to know your employees, your leaders, so that you understand their experiences, right? And so I think we as people be in relationship with other people. And I'm not saying you need to get really deep with someone else that works for you, but at least have an understanding of who they are, what their identities are, their experiences as whether that's people from a minoritized community or people of color, people from a low socioeconomic status or a different faith. So you can have a better understanding and you can, I think people want to feel valued. And so that's a way, one, to share your own story and to get to know those. So you create a sense of belonging in your organization where your employees, your leaders know or feel like they know they can thrive and be who they are and not feel like they'll always have to hide who they are for fear of retribution. I think that leads to a successful organization that creates. I mean, if you want to use the business imperative, it helps your bottom line because it's cheaper. In the book, I talk about where the research that Gallup has done. It's cheaper to retain your talent than to always hire new talent. So if you create a community, and I'm not saying community, if you can create a working environment where people feel like they belong, they will want to stay there. They will want to work for you. They will want to show up for you. Instead of creating an environment where people feel like they're always in fear or they feel like their ideas are valued, that it's gonna, hurt you. And I would say the same for churches, right? We want to create a culture of belonging for our congregates to feel like they can come in and be who they are, even if we may not ultimately agree. And I'm not saying, again, I'm not saying you need to change your values and beliefs, but be open to the conversation and know that there may be some difficult conversations to have, right? But from a business side, I think it ultimately impacts the bottom line. It also attracts clients and customers who feel like, oh, Joel's business really, I really like what they're doing, and I want to spend my money there. And so they treat me well, whether it's a plumbing business or an electrical business. When they show up to my house or my business, they want to get to know me and not be afraid to talk to me, but engage in conversation. So,
Good. It's good. Yeah, and actually, I could go down on the side on Christian organizations. I'll just say in passing, one advantage we have in Christian organizations is most people that want to work, and I'm talking about people that want to work for Christian organizations, are there for the mission. And so it
mhm,
doesn't take, but a lot of times Christian organizations, they end up using the mission sometimes in manipulative ways against employees versus actually creating, places that flourish. And
mhm.
that can be a challenge. And I think the work you do has a lot they could say there. You already mentioned in your book, it's your personal journey, and you have a couple really beautiful metaphors. I'm wondering if you could share, like maybe your favorite metaphor from Dear White Leader that helps illustrate what cultural humility looks like, or maybe what the organizational excellence would look like.
Yeah. So I actually heard it in a sermon. It's that metaphor of the redwood tree, right? That, and I share this story when I do speaking and workshop facilitation, is that I always thought that redwood trees had deep roots. The reality is redwood trees have shallow roots, but their roots grow outward, right? And they intertwine with the other trees around them. So they're working together. And as you know, I mean, the other thing that recently I've been thinking about is because I heard someone talk about it is roots don't grow straight, right? They're not like just straight out. They kind of go all over the place, right? And that's like our journeys. I mean, our journeys are all there's not a straight path that any of us have taken, right? And and so just like the roots, we are on a path. But what makes us stronger is when we're able to join with others in community to really begin to process what we're learning, mistakes we make, and we support each other. And we actually take nutrients from each other in the sense of we are able to give to each other. Um, and that is helping me be better. So, I have four kids. They're very different. They are neurodiverse. And it's taught me some things, but it's helped me when I talk to other people who have the same type of kids, or I mean, neurodiverse kids, or have similar experiences with kids. We're able to support each other, and sometimes it's give each other advice. Sometimes it's just listening to each other, and that's what I believe. Having this posture of cultural humility is you can, and I talk about this in the book, is you can't do it in isolation. You need others around you, just like discipleship, right? You can't grow in your faith. I don't believe you can grow in your faith just by sitting in your living room reading your Bible without interacting with others or being in community.
Good.
And that's an important thing to remember in developing this posture. That you have to do it together and you have to wrestle with it and you have to ask hard questions. And so whether it's you and me, Brian, in relationship, or you hire me as a coach or you have mentors, um, that that's going to help, right? You're going to, whether you use that old adage, iron sharpens iron, right? And so that's the metaphor that really, I believe, illustrates cultural humility, particularly the community aspect or doing it together. So that other awareness, right, which is a key aspect of self-awareness and self-critique.
Yeah,
Because
no,
when you
but you
hear
really,
people's,
yeah.
yeah, because when you hear other people's stories, you're able to recognize, man, there's some challenges that people have, whether it's because they are from a lower socioeconomic status, or they have a different ethnic identity than me, or they're an immigrant to this country. I now know that there's some things that need to be changed, right? Or things that I need to be an advocate for to provide voice or help them have voice where they may not have a voice. And that's where I think that metaphor really beautifully illustrates that.
Yeah, thank you. I love that. I love that metaphor. It's just it's a great story. Now, and you just mentioned a couple things, and even going back to your previous answer. So When we talk about culture of humility, that's something that we want to grow. And I love when we talk, we always talk about you always talk about curiosity. I mean, if you were watching some video, you have a shirt on, be curious, not judgmental, which maybe that's it in a nutshell there, right? But
Mhm.
you mentioned also like blind spots, and that can be one of the most painful things because who wants to find out all your blind spots, right? It's kind of a painful piece. So
Mhm. Mhm.
but, part of our growth in grace, I'm speaking to to Christians on this podcast, part of our sanctification is actually growing in our love for God and neighbor. And so part of that ends up allowing, I would say, the Lord to make it clear to us who we really are, both the good parts, but also the places that need grace. And so, like, what are some ways that you help clients recognize blind spots? I mean, yeah, how do we do
Yeah,
that?
yeah, it's not an easy process, and I talk about it in the book, and even in my own life, there's things that have been pointed out to me that I don't like about myself, right? Even as a leader, right? I may have said something that offended someone. I may have committed a microaggression or a clear act of bias. And someone says, and in the book, I share the story of being told that I have a bias towards men and extroverts, right? And so that created a moment for me where I could have done one of two things. I could have become defensive and said, "Well, that's just the way I am. You can't. I'm not going to change, right? You have to change. The person pointed out to me has to change. They just have to get over it." Which sometimes happens. We probably may have worked for people or been around people that whenever you point something out to them, they don't like feedback, even if it's meant to help them, right? Or do what I did, which is have a growth mindset where I take the feedback, I apologized, and then go, okay, how do I get better moving forward or have a growth mindset? So when I work with clients, we talk about bias, particularly around this area and how it shows up. Bias is never going to go away. We are, if you're going to use, faith language, we are sinful creatures, right? That's who we are. We're gonna mess up. And though the yes, and there is opportunity for grace and for atonement, right? And that means being open to receiving the criticism or recognizing that we have a blind spot and then going, okay, how do we get better at this so it doesn't happen again? The bias is never going to go away. It's always going to be present, but we can do things to mitigate the impact and or to lessen the likelihood of it showing up in our daily lives or in our leadership. And that requires self-awareness. And I mean, I tell the story. I don't like the fact that I need a hearing aid, but it became clear to me from people around me, like especially my kids, are like, "Dad, like I just said something to you. Did you not hear me?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's time, right?" Or the fact that I was getting bald, right, and it was time to just shave it all off. That's more of a funny story, but sometimes, if we're not aware of our blind spots, or if we don't become aware of our blind spot, we can hurt people and we can hurt organizations and create damage, long lasting damage, because we have decided not to be open to criticism or we blame the other person.
Sure.
And that I believe is not uh, that is not a good thing as a leader. I think we need to be open. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean you don't have a conversation so you truly understand. And there may be some disagreement as to what someone else experienced, but you're open to the conversation. And with that example of when that um, person came to me, is one, I recognized I had something that I needed to improve on, but it also demonstrated to me that I had created an environment where someone felt comfortable enough to say, "You got a problem." And it was someone who directly reported to me. So she didn't have a fear that I was going to fire her, reprimand her, write her up. There was a genuine concern that I won for her, that I had hurt her, offended her. So all I did, the what I did was I apologized, not expecting anything in return other than I want to get better.
No, that's good, and that I mean I think that's such a great thing that you model because we've all heard stories of somebody trying to give honest feedback, and then you get blacklisted or whatever, and the relationship's never the same, and all you literally did was you thought the person wanted feedback, and they even said they did, but then you had the courage to say that. So,
Mhm.
it's so I think again that's why your book's so important. It's like if we as leaders. I mean, I've had, boy, have I had some good feedback over the years, Joe, which we won't even share here. And it always feels wonderful when you get that, but you always have a choice. You can be defensive, and I can say I've been defensive at different times, and then sometimes, as I've gotten older, I think it's gotten easier because at some point you're just like, okay, I have to get better at all these things. I've learned most of my lessons in my life, unfortunately, from making mistakes. That is what most of us do. It doesn't have to be that way,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
it's so critical. And like, what is, you know, other than maybe our Christian faith, which again, that isn't the panacea because we've all experienced people that had deep faith. We don't even want to question it that couldn't take feedback for whatever reason. So, what's the difference between a person who can take feedback or learns to take feedback and a person that doesn't? If you have any kind ways of describing that.
Yeah, well, I go back to Carol Dweck's work around growth
Mm,
mindset and fixed
good.
mindset.
Yeah.
And her research shows that there are people that have learned to be open to feedback. And I think those are the leaders we want to work for. Those are the leaders we want to serve under. And because they are self-aware enough that they understand that they want to keep getting better. So we know the brain is malleable, right? I mean, we see research, right? I have my a good mentor of mine had a really severe stroke at a very old age, right? In her late 60s, early 70s. She taught herself to talk and walk again. That is a clear example, and there's other medical research that demonstrate this, that the brain can be taught again something new, even though it doesn't remember how to do that. So for someone to say, I'm just an old dog and you can't teach me new tricks, well, no, you can learn new tricks, but you have to be willing to do the work. And I think the thing that distinguishes people who are able to be self-aware versus those that are not, one, they recognize that they have work to do and they're willing to put the work and they don't look for shortcuts. Our brain is wired for shortcuts. We like to have shortcuts for good reason. I mean, I don't want to always have to think about, whether I like broccoli versus carrots, right? Or I just want to know that well, I don't want to like have a deep thought about why I like broccoli or whatever. Or we make some assumptions based on some of the experiences that we've had with organizations or people. One of the key aspects of developing deep curiosity is the ability to suspend our judgment. Um, and that is, really, we need to detach ourselves from our assumptions. And if you're able to do that or work towards that, I think you can become a more self-aware person. But it's not an overnight process. It takes time. And I think we sometimes, for good or bad, we're lazy people. We don't want to think about, having to fix ourselves. Uh, and because we've been successful the way we've always been, and this is the way we've always done things. Well, the problem with that is it's created potentially for some people, it's created an environment where then people don't feel like they belong or can come to you because of the way you react or because you have this assumption about men over women or women and or minority groups or whatever that then permeates your leadership to the point where you aren't able to successfully lead different people. So you end up hiring everyone that thinks like you and looks like you because we've allowed those biases to take hold and don't recognize that there may be some things we can learn if we're more open to different ideas and different people, different foods, different cultural groups, different nationalities, and that takes courage. So I think there's also the fear piece. Like I don't know if I want to do this because I just don't want it. I want the way things to be the way they've always been. And nostalgia can be a powerful thing in a good way, but it can also trip you up because we really can't go. We shouldn't go back to the way things were, right? So women at times weren't given company credit cards because there was crazy, some absurd idea that they couldn't stay within budget. So if you give them a credit card, they're gonna, spend a lot of money. Or, well, if we hire this woman, she's gonna get pregnant. So we shouldn't hire women. And we don't want to go back. I don't want to go back to those days. And that's what gets in the way of people is this fear, also the unwillingness to do the work to get better.
Good. Yeah, let's shift this and specifically address some things that like pastors that are listening and lay people that would like to see their churches grow. Because when we start talking about nostalgia, that sits inside of almost every church. Every church, unless it's brand new, oftentimes has some narrative where how great it used to be. And again, a lot of folks listening here are serving churches where have a big sanctuary that isn't filled like it used to be. And there's always this desire, oh, if we could just get back, or hey, we want to reach, we're all older now, we need to reach younger people. Or it's a congregation that was planted in a neighborhood that over the course of time has shifted in its basic ethnic makeup. And so the church membership doesn't even look like anything in its neighborhood. And this problem can really go across the racial divides. And so,
Mhm.
I'm going to guess mostly Anglo pastors, mostly Anglo white pastors would be the audience for the podcast, not exclusively so. So that's always a challenge if they want to begin to do multicultural ministry, because I don't know too many of my friends that don't want to do this, but it's how do you do that? How do you lead? But then there's also the same problem. You can end up having an African American congregation who's now in an area that's again the population's changed, and so maybe it's all this happens in Florida a lot. Now you have a lot of Spanish speakers in the neighborhood,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
so how do you apply some of the principles that you teach in a way that can help a congregation or a pastor lead a congregation to do legitimate um, missional outreach to their neighbors in a way that sees their neighbors as equals, which I think would
Yeah.
be invaluable.
Yeah. Well, I would say for leaders in the church congregants, get clear on their biases, right? What are their biases, particularly about that, whatever the cultural group is or generational group, and understand that their biases can get in the way of trying to create an environment where that particular group they're trying to reach is feeling welcomed, right? Uh, and then the power of proximity, right? Being present in the community, whether that's showing up at city council meetings, events in the parks, building relationships with people so that they get to know you, the pastor, the congregants, the leaders, and then you could talk about your church, right, or your organization. Those are the beginning steps. But the other thing I will say, and I don't want to oversimplify it, but it is a work in progress. You can't expect to then, put up a poster that says all are welcome and expect everyone to feel welcomed in your congregation. Um, you also could start with analyzing your congregation, right? Whether that's study, like doing a study to unearth what is the data telling you about how your congregation may feel about being really open, right? And what does that mean? Because we've heard horror stories, right? Well, if that person starts showing up, I'm going to leave, right? And if if you know that that's the internal piece already happening in your church, then the likelihood of you being able to attract outside people to come in is not going to be very high. So that's where it gets tricky in the sense of there's no easy fix, and it takes time. And I know for some people are like, well, we just don't have time to do all that. Well, the reality is that you're going to have to take some time, at least to start acknowledging some things. The problem is that pastors are feeling pressure, right, from their congregants. This is my evaluation of the current church structure, to conform a certain way or to preach a certain style. And there now the pastor, the leader, isn't able to be creative because they fear what their congregation or their deacon board or their board of directors are going to do when they start thinking outside the box. So if the leadership isn't ready to think outside the box, to live in proximity, to be able to sit with people who are different than them, then it's just not going to happen. So, perfect example, I would say, is my church. And my church is not perfect. But one thing they did, particularly around the time that they started working in the community with youth, particularly Latino youth, and they recognized that they were trying to help them get ready for college. They started hearing stories, particularly from those that were undocumented, who had been educated in our school system, K through 12, who wanted to go off to college, but they couldn't because they didn't have legal documentation, and that created a need in the community that they then created or helped get an immigration attorney to come in, do some work, figure out how to help them, and then the deferred action for childhood arrivals was signed, and they then created an opportunity to help students who qualified to apply for DACA. That was a congregation doing work in the community, seeing a need, right? Because they were in proximity, they heard stories, other awareness, and then realizing we need to help redress some imbalances or level the playing field for people that we feel like should have access to higher education. That ultimately would change the system, and that's the three characteristics of cultural humility. So that's what I believe that's what churches can start doing, but it's not an overnight thing, and it does require work. But if your church, if you, the pastor, know that your church is not ready, then the work is really for you to try to help your church get ready if it's going to survive and thrive, right? If it's going to be sustainable, or if you're just going to eventually close the doors because your congregation has gotten so small. There's just. So that's what I would say. That's the advice I would give is find out what the needs are of the community and be present
Good.
and show up. And that may mean advocating for some change, which then creates, I know, some challenges for some congregations about being too active or too much of an activist congregation. But I think that's what being in proximity may mean you have to do if you're truly going to meet the needs of your community.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, I'm going to ask you one more question, then we'll try to roll things out. And I'm going to take a break because yeah, I really like your answer about slow progress, audit, asking internal questions, and I'm curious. I never thought about a question that I like to use when I do kind of missional or church planning kind of consults. I use this in my class sometimes, but critique this as maybe a way for a pastor to help the congregation to kind of see what the blind spots. I ask myself this, and I sometimes invite churches to do this. If you really want to reach people, and this sounds innocuous, but I think it's the question kind of goes like this: who does another person have to be or become to hear the gospel from me? And what I mean by that is, like, obviously, if you can't speak English, you can't hear the gospel from me, period. Right. And if I'm a church, who do I have to be or become to be able to attend this church in a way that lets me hear the gospel? In the past, and this is one of those controversial issues, like the American flag in a sanctuary can sometimes signal you're not safe here. For some people, or a certain style of worship. I've seen a church, well, our church plant back in Orlando almost 20 years ago now, we had a lot of homeless people that came, which was really nice wow, we're being diverse, but I would see people walk in, see the homeless people sitting there, walk right back out. And so it's expectations. So like, what do you think of a question like that? And, what might be some obvious ways to like ask ourselves so we could find what our blind spots are when we think that we're open, inviting, and everybody's welcome?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's a powerful question. It's a good coaching question. Um, I would say for us to do the work, this is where the community piece comes in, right? Is maybe identifying some biases that we think we have, and then having a conversation with the people we know and say, I've been reflecting on my biases or my blind spots. And I think I have a blind spot on this particular area. How would you like, how do you feel, or what reflections would you offer to me based on what you've seen of me, right? To get some confirmation. It requires vulnerability and trust, but I think it's important. Whether, I mean, you could say a performance review is supposed to kind of point some of those things out, right, in a business, but doesn't always. But I think it's having people around you that you trust that you can ask for feedback. Feedback is critical to finding your blind spots, unearthing them, and developing a strategy to get better or to eliminate some blind spots or minimize the impact of biases that they may have. But I would say one exercise is to get clear about what you think they are and then share with others to get people's perceptions. And this is why it's important to have people around you that aren't
Yes, man.
confirmation bias, right? Where we want people around us who only think like us, look like us because it's comfortable. Well, that could lead to one, confirmation bias, and keep us from really truly growing. So that's why it's important to have people who may be critical or think differently, have a different political affiliation than we do, different socioeconomic status, so that we can, and people that we can talk with and trust. I think that's a key aspect of addressing blind spots and the biases we have, but it requires vulnerability, which is hard for people. For some people don't mind being vulnerable. Others, they'll have a hard time with that for whatever reason, something that's happened in their past or the way they were raised that creates this like, I don't want to tell people about myself because I have, I just don't like it. I think if that's your attitude, then I think you're always going to struggle with the blind spots that are present for you. And you're not going to be able to grow until something really truly happens that shakes you up.
That's a good word. Yeah, and again, I want to recommend your latest, well, your book, Dear White Leader. And where can folks find that?
Yeah.
Easy, yeah.
Well, I'm always a big supporter of independent bookstores. So if you have an independent bookstore in your community, you can get it there. They can order it for you. If you prefer the Behemoth, Amazon, you can find it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. It's also available on audio and electronic as well. So if you prefer, listen to it, you can listen to it. And so you can find out more about how to get the book. Also, if you want to read the first chapter before you go out and make the investment, at my website, dearwhiteleader.com, which I know Brian will put in the show notes, that you can have access to. And you can poke around the website and hear some other podcasts I've been a guest on to talk more about the book. Download the first chapter if you'd like to read, get a sample chapter.
And what keeps you grounded now? We were having some conversations. The world sometimes seems kind of chaotic and everything, and you got four kids. I mean, that does its own has its own necessity of being grounded. So, like, what do you do to keep grounded as a coach, as a leader, as an author? What keeps you grounded so you can do the good work that you do in the world, Joel?
Yeah. Well, this year, my three words are curiosity, trust, and courage.
Nice. Wow.
CTC. And they may be my words for the remainder of my life.
Yeah.
Because I really like this idea of remaining curious, even when it's hard. So when things are stressful, there's anxiety. Why is this happening? Why do I feel this way? So the curiosity. But what keeps me grounded, Brian, is my faith in knowing that ultimately there's someone else in control of my life. I just have to learn how to release it more. But that keeps me grounded, and being able to go back to that piece is really important for me. It keeps me going because it gives me hope. And I don't always have to understand everything. I think God is in control of everything. Or if you have any listeners who necessarily maybe not Christian, but some other faith community, I believe my faith grounds me and it can ground you even in times where it feels dire. And so that's always something I go back to.
Yeah, and if beyond your book, Dear White Leader, what are some other books if somebody wants to go a little bit deeper into this kind of work that you like to recommend, or maybe have impacted you profoundly?
Yeah, the book Seek, Seek, which is right here, by Scott Shigioka, is a book on curiosity, how to develop deep curiosity. And have found it very, very helpful. Now I use it as part of my training when around culture humility, because I believe that there's a lot of good nuggets in there, and for us to apply what we're if we're going to do this work. The other one is Unleashing the Complexity Genius, because our nervous systems need to be retrained to be curious, to be open, to seek feedback, and that requires sleep, exercise, um, those kinds of things, to retrain our nervous systems and unlearn some of the things that we've unfortunately have learned and have taken hold and created the blind spots and the biases that we have.
Can you say that title one more time?
Unleashing the Complexity Genius.
Complexity Genius. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a small book, so it's not a heavy read. My book is not a heavy read. Scott's actually very similar, a lot of narrative with a lot of exercises like my book to help you start applying what you're learning as you read through it.
No, that's good. And I think I want to check out Unleashing the Complexity Genius in a sense, just because
Yep.
around this episode when this is coming out, I've been talking more about learning to pay attention to the body. It's a contemplative approach. A lot of
Yeah,
my
it's very,
guests talk
very,
about
it's very much
contemplative
getting in
stuff.
touch
Yeah.
with, yeah, it's very much getting in touch with your body, how you breathe, how you're feeling, and not being afraid to, that's where the curiosity piece comes in, right? Not being afraid to lean into why is that? Why do I feel that right now? What's happening around me? What's the context I find myself in? To then recognize it and then, okay, take a step back.
Yeah, and not to just to go down another rabbit trail, but sometimes finding our blind spots, a lot of that I've noticed, at least in myself, it's your body protects you from things that you're not always even aware of. And sometimes if you can just learn to sit with uncomfortable feelings, you realize that underneath that was some kind of some fear or some hurt. And then you get that opened up. I would say you open up and give it to the Lord, and God slowly kind of peels that off of you. Um, some of those rough around the edges stuff starts coming off because a lot of sometimes our biases are really just defense mechanisms that we aren't even aware of why we have them at half the time. So that sounds really good, Joel.
Mhm.
What's next for you? I mean, I think we were talking, you're writing another book, right? Or you're getting ready to.
Yeah, I'm getting ready to write another book on on exceptional leadership. What is that? What are the characteristics? And then how do you move towards exceptional leadership? Not that effective isn't good, but I think it's a low bar. I think we need to strive to be exceptional leaders so that we can truly create lasting legacies of the work that we do, and that requires work. And so, yeah, so that's the next book project. Now that I put it out in the air, it also provides the accountability for me to start working on it. But that is where I'm going. And I also do, when I do speaking engagements, I do some work around this idea of exceptional leadership versus effective leadership.
And I do want to say to those who are listening, Joel puts out a really good newsletter with lots of resources. Is that dearwhiteleader.com, or is it to go to your
No,
coaching
that's the
website?
upoyocoaching.com. You
Okay.
can click the button to join the newsletter.
All right, Joel. Well, I want to say thank you for being my guest again. I've appreciated our friendship. We've known each other for maybe 5 years now, 6 years even.
Something like that.
It's
Yeah.
yeah, and
Hmm.
we try to meet at least once a month and chat. I'm in Orlando. You're over in the LA area, so I'm grateful for you. Grateful for your work. Congratulations on the book,
Thank you.
and blessings on how the Lord is using you to help grow leaders that can create kingdom, to create organizations and communities of faith that look like the kingdom of God. So thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for having me.
And thanks everyone for listening all the way to end of this week's episode. Everything that we've talked about is in the show notes. Until next time, live by faith, be known by love, and be a voice of hope to others.